contact with the night some years later when I decided to take my own life, where I was on my own and I had no real reason that was apparent to me. Of course there was a reason. I had 2 daughters, a wife who wasn't my wife anymore but legally still was, and my own parents and family, of course. There were people who cared, but they weren't in the picture as far as I was concerned, because there was nothing there to immediately keep me here.
It's horror, blood and horror and gore. That's what happens to the human form, whether you've just watched one of your snipers take a bloke's head off.
Gentlemen, a very good morning to you both.
Morning, Chris.
Morning, Chris.
Andy. What a fantastic day for a podcast. Friends at home, it's my great pleasure to welcome former Major Andy Shaw, Royal Marines, back to the Bought the T-Shirt podcast. Andy and I did a podcast about a year ago, and without mincing my words, we just talked about the true horror of war and the associated aftermath that individuals have to deal with. And it was, as I say, it was an incredibly popular show. So welcome back, Andy.
Thank you, Chris.
Rick Coulson, who is my troop mate for the weekend, when we will be recreating the Royal Marine Commando's legendary 9-mile speed march up in Achnacarry, Scotland, to raise awareness of this alarming veterans' mental health and suicide issue that we've got. Rick was a corporal in the Royal Marines, seen a lot of action, both physically and I think is metaphysically the word. And we're here today just to have a good, honest chat about, let's say, combat PTSD and also other factors in this I don't know if collage is the right word, but things that people might not consider when they think of the military and they think of trauma. There's obviously many factors involved, and I think a lot of them probably don't even get spoken about. And then, of course, we're going to be looking at answers and what works. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to hand over to Rick, because Rick, we were chatting about your experience in Afghanistan, and it for people that haven't been there, it really sounds like the stuff of war films, doesn't it?
It literally is. When you are war fighting, you're doing a counterinsurgency, which is, you're concentrating on the hearts and minds of the populace, and you are fighting an enemy which is, not uniform, because if it was in a conventional manner, you wouldn't be there for long. But as soon as them shots are fired, you are in full war fighting mode. And what does that mean to people? That means you have got every asset available at that given moment or contact, or the assets are on station. So you have your own mortars. You've obviously got yourselves who are armed, and it can be close quarter fighting, and was close quarter fighting, and a lot has been read up about Afghanistan and the intensity of it. You've also got your fixed wing, so your aircraft and your fighter jets, and you've also got your rotary wing, which is, say, all your close air support. So you imagine putting all these weapon systems plus artillery, mortars. So as soon as the shots are fired, you are in that full war fighting mode. So, people who play Call of Duty and they just see everybody firing and everything coming together. It literally is like that. And there's a certain adrenalines which go on when someone is trying to kill you. And they want to kill you, and you are a trophy, especially as a British or American soldier with regards to their beliefs. And the last thing you want to be doing is getting caught. But when someone's trying to kill you, then your training, your self-preservation, your camaraderie, professionalism all comes to fruition. But you imagine the experience of being up close with people. Might have gone paintballing and they've had a lucky escape as one's just gone past or one's ricocheted off of them. And, you know, it's hard for people who haven't been to war to have a relatable experience to it. But for any adrenaline rush you've ever had, be it from people doing drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, extreme sports, nothing, I can only speak for myself, nothing comes close to the experience of war and the adrenalines you experience. It's all I can say, and the intensity. So down to 10 meters, fighting someone at 10 meters.
It just from what you're saying alone, Rick, just conjures up like a million. I guess to somebody listening to this, it's what you've just said is quite linear. It's like, oh, all right, this guy's gone to war, he's fighting the enemy. I think for many of us, though, I'm thinking of all the implications. Sebastian Junger, was it, that he made that incredible documentary? I think it was called Restrepo, about an outpost in Afghanistan. That
it's just out on Amazon now. Yeah. Outpost. Yeah.
The Marines were manning it, and he said they lived in such like squalid conditions. They were getting battered every day. But the moment those lads went home, all they wanted to do was go back to war again. And what we're here today to discuss, if we can come through these experiences like so damaged that we're in a veteran suicide epidemic, and I'm not, part of the reason I wanted to have this chat is it's not just the war. Obviously, many of us carried huge amounts of trauma into the forces from our childhoods. I think it seems to go hand in hand with seeking to prove ourselves for maybe the lack of support we had when we were young. But yes, just that point that it isn't that it's struggling for my words here.
But when you're in war, Chris, when you're in war compared to on camp, and you know, you are a volunteer to be a soldier. You know, people have to remember that you're not not in our country, you're conscripted. So you have that professionalism, but life on operations, everybody knows a place, everybody can step up. You know, you have to step up. I had to step up. My troop sergeant was obviously blown up severely. And I became troop sergeant because I was a senior corporal. But you know your place out there. You know your job. And life is just a little bit easier. And it goes back to what you're saying about the guys for the outpost is wishing you were back out there. There's also that element of you've spent a long time training for operations. Never just pre-deployment training, which you do as well. So you're good at what you do. You're at your top of your professional game, and everybody is. And that you get into routines. So the transitioning when you're leaving or when you've had a substantial job is you have lack of routines. That can help throw. And then when you've got time to sit on all these things. So I go back to the analogy of how we deal with things like grieving processes. So like a funeral of a family member who dies, we're accustomed or grown into that. And we go on that journey, whether we went to one as a child. So you imagine being out on operations, one of your colleagues is killed. you're not naturally going through these grieving processes because you've still got to focus on the here and now, because you've got to stay alive. You've got to have that mindset too. You know, it's got to be switched on. So there becomes a point where all these are constantly building up over many of years, and you're not getting your normal release of what you're accustomed to for how to, it's not putting it to bed. I can't think of the words, Chris, but you're not going through the natural grieving processes. You obviously have a ceremony, you know, a service, a little remembrance service, but life at that moment goes on.
Yeah, you can't let your guard down, can you?
No, you haven't forgotten, because it's still obviously inside you, but life at that moment has to go on. Now, you imagine getting all your leave, or when you come back, or when years later it manifests, and all this can come. So it's like a glass of water. There's some experiences there. I pour another traumatic event in. Eventually, it's gonna overflow. Now, what period of time that does, no one can put a significant, you know, a specific number on that. Mine came when I was just leaving.
Yeah.
Just as I was leaving, I'd put my notice to leave.
We'll come and talk more about that, because, of course, while you're in the forces, it's not like you're on a spiritual journey. You're on a very hands-on. We're either fighting, or we're training, or we're deciding what £3,000 mountain bike to buy at the weekend. That's just the life that we you know, or whether to go on the beer. And of course, I'm from what I can see, people are coming through that process, and they just haven't got the skills to then deal not just with the trauma that they've been through in battle, but also the stuff that they've brought into the force. But you said something there, Rick. I'm going to come back to it, but just to drop the thought, you said, "Oh, when my sergeant was blown up," it's like, WTF? You just say it like that's,
yeah.
You know,
it's
like
quite flippant. It is quite flippant.
Yeah, we've been down to the shops. I bought some eggs. I bought some.
Yeah, and I do say it like that. And being, you know, I've been a guest on Andy's Mountain Way charity, which is one-on-one with him, with the team behind him, putting a program together for you. And I'm sure Andy will discuss that. And Andy did the same to me in France. We had a conversation, and he said, "Stop right there. You just mentioned about 8 things." And I've had it before with, you know, other people, you know, double figure things you've just mentioned, and each one is a trauma.
Yeah. What I want to do, Rick,
it becomes normal.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And war is not normal.
I want to come back to it, mate, because it's not normal. And I also think people need to hear about, like, what is that like as an experience to go through. But before we do, let's come to Andy, because Andy was very honest about his experience in the Falklands. Can you do a sort of a recap, Andy, if that's okay?
Yeah, apologise for this background noise here, Chris. Last time we spoke, we had appalling heat. Now we've got a biblical storm just suddenly arrived.
Is that rain?
It's appalling rain, yes. I just had to get up and shut all the windows. I'm in a conservatory. This is the roof. This is my little centre of my universe. But can you hear me okay? No problems?
Yes, right. I can.
Okay. Well, very, very briefly then. The Falklands War, probably, you know, for my generation, that will never be forgotten. But for younger people, of course, might wonder what it was all about. Basically, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, which are a sovereign territory for the UK, with UK citizens living there. Long-running dispute been going on for a long time. And we had to go and recapture them. I was in a unit called 4-5 Commando, but the whole of 3 Commando Brigade was down there with 2 para-battalions. And then 5 Infantry Brigade joined us as well. So it was a big UK reaction. And like Rick was saying, talking about total war, the one thing you didn't have, Rick, was naval gunfire support. You're a bit too far away from the wet stuff for that. But we had 4.5 as well from, in our case, HMS Glamorgan. The war fighting wasn't anything like what Rick's been through, simply because it was so short. The whole thing lasted about a month, you know, not 6 months. And guys who did repeated tours, It's beyond comprehension. In fact, from my perspective, I don't think we've seen anything like that since the end of the Second World War. So that puts Afghanistan and Iraq into perspective. But what it was, of course, was no less intense. And the two main events that my organization went through was, I'm talking about my troop now, was an ambush that went badly wrong. It was a fighting patrol that was meant to go and destroy some enemy positions. And instead, we had a thing called a blue on blue, whereby a friendly force came in front of us and we opened fire on them. That resulted in 4 fatalities and 3 very seriously injured. And about 12 hours later, we were into the main brigade battle. 4-5 Commander's objective was a mountain called Two Sisters. We lost 4 more guys in that battle. And that was it, basically. A few days later, the enemy surrendered and the war was over. So very, very brief by comparison. But the intensity, nonetheless, was exactly the same. And you don't need to go through these experiences more than once to receive effects or anything like that. That was the beginning, the trigger, if you like, for me, for my own personal journey, which led me to where I am today. And that's 39 years ago, just over. We just had the anniversary a week or so ago. So, and it's always a difficult time of year for me. A lot of things happened that week, not just the Falklands. I had 2 daughters born in the same week as well, although obviously a couple of years apart. So there's a great deal of emotional, nostalgic baggage, if you like, which has to be contended with. Normally, if I could, I'd go and bury myself in the mountains for a couple of weeks and stay off social media and everything else, but it's not possible running the charity. So that's my big challenge. But anyway, that's what actually happened.
Yeah, I just want to point out for our friends at home, Andy, that you were awarded the King's Badge. So that's the most outstanding recruit in troop training. Then went on to get a Corps commission, and you were awarded the Silver Sword. Is that, am I right?
Its proper term is the Royal Marine Officer's Sword of Honor.
The Sword of Honor.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is, we're not here to talk about such things, but as an aside for friends at home, that is exceptional. 2 exceptional achievements.
There've only been 5 in the history of the Corps that have been awarded both.
And then to go into combat as a young officer and have to go through such an ordeal, a life-changing experience. And then, I mean, it's a war. You've got to carry on. You can't just say, right, I'm just off home for a bit. I'm going to take a few weeks leave, you know, drink a few beers, see a therapist, talk this. No, you're into the next battle. You're a leader of men. You don't have that luxury. It just borders on ununderstandable.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. That's exactly how I felt when I realized what we'd done, and went from one end of the spectrum, mental spectrum, to the other. There was a moment of elation, isn't the right word. I can't think of an adjective to describe the feeling. It obviously is an adrenaline-driven thing, as Rick was referring to, but it's much more than that, I think. It's partly relief when you realize you're not going to die, that the enemy's dying, and there's the mental change that's taken place over a period of time. For us down there in the Falklands, it was quite quick. Once we realized the war was actually going to happen, the fighting war rather than the political one, well, then the adjustment began, but it didn't really happen until the first casualties start to occur and ships are sunk and aircraft are shot down and things like that. And then when it came down to actually fighting people more or less hand to hand, you've made that mental adjustment completely. So you're a very different person. You're 2-dimensionally focused on the job. You don't really see outside the very narrow parameters. And the emotions are out of control. And I remember feeling that elation. It kind of implies we're all brutal killers. We're not. We're normal human beings, but we've transferred to something else, a different plane, because you can't survive a battle, let alone win, if you don't have that approach. It's not the Tufty Club. So you've really got to get in there and give it everything you've got. But even that doesn't sound right. You know, I think if the training is good, which all of ours, fortunately, in the Royal Marines is, then you don't have any control over this. You make that mental shift. So I was in the zone, if you want to put it in modern terms. And then came the reality that the people in front of us who were moaning and dying weren't actually the enemy, they were our friends. So I went completely the other direction, and I lost all sense of perspective. But I think the first overwhelming emotion, alongside with the horror and the shock, was a desire to leave and go home. And if it hadn't been for my troop sergeant whispering in my ear, "Sir, the troop needs you now more than ever before," I'm not saying I would have actually done that, but and contrast that with the night some years later when I decided to take my own life, where I was on my own and I had no real reason that was apparent to me. Of course, there was a reason. I had two daughters, a wife who wasn't my wife anymore, but legally still was, my own parents and children, family, of course. There were people who cared, but they weren't in the picture as far as I was concerned, because there was nothing there to immediately keep me here. So there was a big difference in those two things. Those were the two worst nights of my life.
Can you fellas just elucidate for us without, let's not all get ourselves upset or whatever, but, what is it you say hand-to-hand fighting? I mean, I've been in a Corps, so I know what you're talking about. But again, people at home probably have this glossy image of war, like it's Hollywood, where you might see a bit of blood splash up, but that it's very, very, very limited.
It's horror, blood and horror and gore. That's what happens to the human form, whether you've just watched one of your snipers take a bloke's head off at 300 meters, which it'll split the head in two, from a suicide bomber. When they said they would send, we did a raid, a helicopter assault onto the mountains opposite us. We couldn't yomp there. And it was as a term called dicking, which refers from Northern Ireland, which means they are spotting you and they will report on your movements. So before you've even left your operating base, they know which direction you're going. So we did a helicopter assault onto a place, an enemy stronghold. They obviously weren't happy about that. There was obviously the firefights as usual, which is just, that's just what it is. It's a firefight, a two-way range. Sometimes it used to happen like that. But then, sending a suicide bomber in where they've, in one of their religious schools, madrasas as they called them, which a lot of them used to be in Pakistan, and then they cross over into the border into Helmand province, which was in the southern part of Afghanistan. These guys would obviously be targeting you, whether that be a vehicle-borne IED. So you imagine with these IEDs, it's not just your own guys, the local population are getting killed and maimed and injured as well. So Andy will be able to tell you about patrolling through a minefield, or aware that the enemy's using mines. So if you put that with the Russian legacy ones like the film Kajaki, where they obviously migrate, and then you've got, because they used to link up with they were unbelievable at the IEDs, down to literally a drawing pin of a bit of metal to be able to complete the circuit. So wooden pressure plates, etc. Tripwires onto anti-personnel and anti-tank mines left over from the Russians. And you imagine the devastation all this causes to you. And then you've got the fighting. Dagger here. My commando dagger fighting knife. Which you have your usual bayonet, but we was doing jungle drills, Chris, through the high corn. So you imagine the visibility of that. So you fix bayonets, you obviously you do your drills for how you would go through that environment. So you imagine when a firefight kicks off and it's in that close proximity. So I've had that dagger up to the throat of a dicker who was lucky to live on that specific day. You obviously check your enemy dead as how you would normally approach that. I know there's infamous cases where you're either going to shoot them dead, and you are going to shoot them dead. And I don't care what anybody says about how many rounds are going into them. You are going to exterminate that threat to life back to you. But also because they were known for suicide vests, how do you go about then checking them? Because there's a waiting period. You just imagine the blood and mess which is caused, and then kids from artillery barrages, which families have stayed in and not moved out of the area when the Taliban have come in or we've moved up. because it's an area weapon, as devastation. So when you get mass casualties coming to your operating base, and I was a team medic, trained team medic, and yes, you're practicing your medical skills, but when it comes on to children, then there's a big difference, and it hits you in different ways. And it goes back to that human health element, which you both just touched on. We are on, which Andy just spoke about. We are on the human as well, but we're in that mindset of doggy, literally kill or be killed. And it seems really cliche to mention that, but it literally is. You've got somebody wanting to kill you. And when it was kinetic in Afghanistan before, it was still kinetic, but they had the ID threat. They was going over the bodies of their own dead to get to you. So it's as if it was like Korea and the Chinese just coming in waves on a smaller scale, obviously. That's what it was like.
Hand-to-hand fighting in the Falklands there wasn't so much of that. It was more, sort of within 300 meters, because we were basically shooting at each other. But we did get quite close in places. Where we got really physical with people actually was in Northern Ireland. Not actually shooting people, but riots and back in the 80s. And even if you go further back to a day in July, I think in 72, when the IRA set off 19 bombs in Belfast in one day, that was extremely violent and physical as well. So, you come across these experiences in all sorts of conflicts, really, and you've got to be prepared from everything, from right up, as Rick was saying, right up close to indirect fire, basically calling in whatever you've got in assets controlling you. It's a complete picture. And that's why we're professionals. We can do that. We can direct aircraft.
It does. And like, historically, I know there's been certain allegations about prisoner handling, but there's a thing called maintaining the shock of capture. Now, what is that going to be? Well, I'm going to inflict a little bit of pain on that prisoner, because under the Geneva Convention, if he tries to escape, I can legally shoot him dead. Now, I had a friend who was kicked out for slapping a Taliban prisoner. And this is quite a powerful story, actually, because we were short of troop sergeants. As I said, my troop sergeant was blown up. And he'd come out to help us. He'd come out from the training centre. He didn't have to, some people volunteered to help bolster the numbers where we were short. And whilst doing this prisoner handling, he's obviously giving him a little bit of a bait. And this is documented. And he was reported by someone else, not a fellow Marine, by someone else in attachment. And him and the troop boss was put in boiler suits, paper ones, and obviously investigated, flown back and kicked out. Now, that team which they caught that night, the QRF had got him. One was shot, killed, one was caught, one got away. And it was in the exact same area 6 weeks after I just got back that same IED team killed my cousin. So when you get a prisoner, I'm not saying we're going to stab them to death and all this, because that's just bullshit. It doesn't happen. Okay, because if they're alive, we want as much information, and they will go through your tactical handling facilities. But do you think they are the flavour of the month? When, if it was the other way around, as people will have seen, I would literally, whether it be a Bowie knife or a pen knife, be having my head cut off and it'd be filmed and put on Al Jazeera. And that's the reality of the people who were fighting. It wasn't conventional.
Yes.
But it is convention towards our rules of engagement. And we are professional. We are professional, of course we are. But an enemy is trying to kill you. So if they're going to be getting rough handled, that is just normal. It's nothing. They are now your prisoner.
Yeah, I don't know if Andy was alluding to the year I was in Northern Ireland. We were there 89. In one day we had 100, I think it was 176 serious incidents. That's either a bombing, a shooting, a kidnapping, a mortaring, vehicle hijacking, vehicles getting set on fire, IRA taking families hostage so they can use the window as a sniping point. We had one of our guys shot dead in the, for argument's sake, like the second week when we were over there. Jock, who was behind me on patrol, got shot 3 times, and I was the first aider. So you can imagine the when you turn around and your oppo is just spark out like that, and the ground's been flicking up at your feet. I think it was 8 rounds, maybe even 10 rounds fired. So at me and Jock, and the sniper, or the gunman, I should say, hit Jock. But here's the thing. Jock didn't die. So that was just a bit like what you say, Ray. It was like incredibly exciting. I don't want to say good fun because it sounds a bit flippant, but
no, but there's a dark sense of humor, isn't there? Because say if he was shot in his breastplate or he had a ricochet or whatever, it's like there's a certain element of fun.
That's basically what happened, right? And as far as the other chap, the KIA, I didn't know him, so it wasn't like it affected me like on that much of a personal level. But what you guys are describing is, I know I keep saying this, but I can't really get my head around what's it like to put one of your oppos into a body bag? I mean,
well, normally that's the sergeant major what does that. I know it was for Afghanistan, the last tour.
We had to put those guys that were killed in the ambush in the blue on blue into sleeping bags, the dead into sleeping bags, and the living into the back of a thing called a BV, which is a track vehicle, which had taken hours to get to our location because there was no Casevac in the way we understand it today. I think you go into a kind of numb state. You're just dealing with the job and you're not really thinking about things. All those emotional reactions come later. And how much later depends on the individual and circumstances affecting his life. With some people, it's literally decades later. With other people, it's pretty instant. So there's no way you can legislate for this. Everybody's affected differently by it. Obviously, it's the one thing you can't train for. And we have trained pretty realistic, using blood and guts from the slaughterhouse and things like that to dress up dummies. It looks pretty good. But it isn't until you actually pick up a body. And that term dead weight, that's where it comes from. You'd be surprised how heavy a body is, much more than when you pick a guy up in the bottom field to do a fireman's lift and sprint along the bottom field with all his kit on. When you actually pick up a dead body, it feels incredibly heavy. So, it's an experience that's absolutely unique, and it's a one-off, and you can never replicate it. So I think, there's a distinct difference here between what you're going through in contact and everything else that happens as a result. And that's where we want to go, bearing in mind the time, mate. If you want to talk about PTSD, we've got the start of this now. Now we need to get onto the real reactions and how it affects people, because I think there's a lot to say here.
Okay, I'm going to dive in with a question for you guys. Is 3 things I want to. I mean, Andy, for example, what you experienced in the Falklands just sounds utterly traumatic in itself. Literally the stuff that then PTSD is created, creates PTSD. What I see a lot of when you see homeless on the street, and you get chatting, blah, 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 and they say to you, oh, no, I never went to war. And then this is what I was saying earlier. This is, I think, the childhood stuff that goes in the military, and you come out without the skills to deal with all this. You got no spirituality, you got no mindfulness, you haven't learned any of those skills. Then we've got there's the killing, which in itself, like, I don't know I'm guessing that's pretty traumatic when years
not really when
okay,
I'm trying to kill you, especially Taliban for us. And not just their notoriety. I've never lost any sleep for pulling that trigger on them and watching someone drop. Confirmed kills as well. Never lost any sleep, Chris. Seriously.
Yeah, no, I'm
everybody's different. I can't speak for anybody else. you know.
Same here. Same here. Enemy dead. We were bringing down fire alarm on two sisters for a week, and it was it was unbelievable how, I hate to say this, but how stupid they seemed to be. It was worse than sheep. They just didn't seem to learn. It was just pure slaughter. But I don't remember feeling any real emotional reactions after the very first round was dropped and thinking, wow. Then after, it was just doing the job. The only time it affected me is when our own people were killed. That's when you start to get that emotional stuff, and you've got to deal with that differently. Yeah, the enemy is the enemy, and you're already in that mental mindset. You've made that shift from peacetime civilian thinking to wartime thinking. It's completely different.
Okay. Do you think what to do with this current suicide thing? I don't know what the statistic is, but let's say 300 a year. That's just the actual suicide. That's not the drinking themselves to death and the battering the wives and the kids, you know, and all the domestic violence, etc., etc. And obviously in the States, it's a far higher figure because they're a bigger country. But do you think a proportion of this is people looking back, having taken life and thinking, what the fuck was all that about? Is that going to be a...
Well, I've been dealing with people with what I'm calling complex military PTSD, and I'll just explain that briefly. That's not an official term, it's my term, simply to differentiate between somebody that's been in a car accident or some other traumatic event, and not to belittle those events neither. The PTSD is a very serious thing, no matter who you are and what happens. Veterans just only happen to be one niche area of that entire population that is suffering from that kind of problem. But the problems we have to deal with are much more complex, I suggest, because of the morality element, and we're just touching on this business about killing, as well as the repetitious nature and everything else, and the culture we come from. So it makes it far more complex. Now, in my experience, and I've been doing this actively since 2012, I would say, and this is a swag, scientific wild ass guess, 75% of the people I've spoken to or actually helped and taken through the program have got issues that stem from childhood, in addition to everything they've been through in the armed forces. So I do think there's a propensity towards having problems if you haven't had the stable background. In my case, I had a wonderful upbringing, I had great parents. There were things that were tough in those days compared to today's, particularly the schools, the way they treated us. But I look upon those now as conditioning, which enabled me to actually survive the horrors of war. And that's possibly what this modern generation is lacking. Sadly, it's not a reflection on individuals or even society. It's just the way things are. But I think now I've turned the negative bullying, paedophile abuse, and of course corporal punishment, which was rife. I've turned that into a big positive, because that enabled me to deal with the issues that subsequently came along. But anyway, yes, just to answer your question, Chris, I say a lot of people have got problems that stem from childhood.
But Andy, you know, as you say there, and you refer to, say, paramedics, etc., there's a detachment with work where they're working on someone they don't know, whereas with us as veterans, we live, we work, we fight together. They are our friends. So, yes. Excuse me, it's always an emotional attachment.
Oh, yes, there is.
To these traumatic incidents. Excuse me, from whether that be someone who's been injured or killed. You know, I've carried injured guys shot on battlefield, and there's actually, from that experience, I've taken the funny part of that from that, which was his section corporal telling him the medic telling the section corporal which way around the morphine should be administered, and he's administered it the wrong one, and it's literally the auto injector's gone through his thumb. So never mind one guy shot through knee, we've now got another casualty with someone off their head on 10 milligrams of morphine. But that's what I took from it, even though I carried that guy under with my team 800 meters under fire. You know, so it's little things, isn't there, which I can look back on that. To other people, they could say that's traumatic. Whereas to myself, I look on the funny part of that with the morphine.
Yeah, I remember an incident in Ireland in 81. Don't forget, mate, you got a mute button there if you're going to cough your guts up. A contact on the Falls Road, and I happened to be inside the base, and one of the guys came banging on the door and ran in. And I looked out thinking, where's the rest of his multiple? And they were out there fighting whoever it was. So I gave this guy a grade A1 bollocking as he slumped against the wall. Then I looked closer and I saw blood coming out of his arm. He'd just been shot. Wasn't a lot of sympathy in those days.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the horrors and all the rest of it, it's the only way you deal with it. And this is why we have the black humor thing, isn't it? You know, it works.
The black
Essential.
humor,
Yeah, very important.
Like
I think medical people have a similar view as well.
The point, I just want to go back to the point, because I was also touching on something else, and I don't want to upset anyone here, but is it a fact in people's mental health, these guys that are struggling, when they look at fuckers like Blair and Bush and Cheney, Rumsfeld, that made billions off this conflict? I'm not even going to talk about the precursors to it, but I think people know what I'm alluding to. Is that a factor? Is there a massive frustration?
I don't blame anyone or anything, Chris, for any feelings, emotions, or behaviors I've experienced as a result of certain things. Other things in life, as you mentioned, can compound the issues, so it becomes a vicious circle. So you've already trying to deal with the traumas, then you've got life struggles, and then this blame culture or looking for reasoning when you are the volunteer, no one's asked you to go and do that. Is you can read into so many things. And, you know, you can look, oh, right, the Iraq war just for oil. Now, I didn't lose a family member in the Iraq war, even though I lost colleagues there, some very close colleagues there in enemy fire and friendly incidents. So I'm not looking to point the finger at anyone, and I don't look to point to the finger to anyone from my own experiences. I describe it as having a natural reaction to unnatural circumstances, and I've always said that. So,
yeah, it's a very, very good point, Rick. Exactly right. I agree with that 100%. The political side of it never enters your mind when you're there, because you're there. It's fait accompli.
Yeah, I'm not, Andy. You misunderstand me. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about we're in a suicide epidemic.
No, I know.
And I'm trying to ascertain. Like,
that's what I'm trying to come on to, Chris.
In your experience, has that been a factor that guys look back and go, what the fuck was all that about?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And I've got wide experience of that because a lot of people do have that moral problem now. And helping them deal with that is an important part of overcoming the PTSD issues. But everybody's different, of course. So, you know, you can't generalize. So some will find it, you know, I mean, I've helped guys who've thrown away their medals, thrown away their berries, do not go to reunions, want nothing to do. Well, what essentially is their primary function in life for 22 years, serving the crown, and they've turned their back on it. And I think that's hideously wrong, that a man has denied his own profession because of all these implications. I helped one guy that was taking a case to the House of Lords to deal with Gulf War illness, which is associated to all this. He had PTSD and that as well, and they've denied its existence. I don't think that case was won. So he was taking on the government, you know, with the aid of MPs.
Well, it's with the any drugs which have been administered to help you in your service, isn't it? Like, you know, whether the anthrax or the mefloquine and Lariam for anti-malarial tablets. You know, I wrote off on my medical documents, and 4 years are missing, and it just so happens to be the period where I was working in West Africa. Yeah,
it's interesting, and I mean, you hear this thing very commonly. There's always a fire in Donington as well when you want medical records. But you know, I think that the point I'm trying to make is, and you touched on this, Rick. You know, the difference between us and our forefathers is that 1939, for example, or 14. They had no choice in the matter. We were all volunteers. And I remember thinking that on the start line, waiting to go into attack on Two Sisters, that I didn't have to be here. I had a clear vision of the day I walked into the careers office in Plymouth, thinking to myself, I didn't need to do this. So I think that's an element you have to bear in mind. It's no good pointing the finger at other people. And sure, politics and what have you goes on all the time. It's always been a murky business, and it's never going to change. And if you can't rationalize that, you're going to be banging your head against the wall for life. You've got to come to some form of understanding that works for you in order to find the peace that you absolutely need, because we've had enough of no peace and we need to get to that level.
The understanding, Andy, the understanding, the misunderstanding is for me personally, the feelings, emotions and behaviors which were happening to me were so alien. I couldn't, and I still can't find reason with that. And I've stopped trying to find that as well. And obviously focusing on what we worked on, but going to that point where, right, there's a difference, like for your audience members, Chris, between sadness and loss and natural griefs in life, which we come to expect in that journey, you know, such as your grandparents dying, your cat dying, you know, or your dog. And they are very personal to people, obviously, and they all are for everyone. But your brain just cannot comprehend what's happening to it when you've gone from whatever character you were. So for myself, it was that chirpy, quirky, cheeky guy, to living like a hermit. We're talking, I left 11 years ago, living in my home for years, literally. At some points, starving. Other points, I had the money to be able to do that. So these thought processes where you're going round, why am I feeling like I'm feeling? I don't know. Why am I sad? I watch something, I start crying, you know, I get all emotional. I cut myself off, like Andy said, but I cut myself off, say, from social media. It wasn't as big then. I've never turned my back. I don't blame anyone, but I just couldn't understand what was going on in here. Then certain events keep playing over, or certain feelings, such as survivor's guilt. Why me? Why wasn't me older? Why was it my cousin who was 22? Why was it this guy who was this age? Why didn't I read that guy's eulogy? And Andy will tell you, as we walked around the lake in France, in Bangers de Luchon, and I'd never told that story up until that point to someone, and it really played heavily. Now, why did something like that, for me, just not reading someone's eulogy of a mate who was killed, compared to certain other traumatic experiences? Because we're all individual, but the feelings inside are so dark. So we describe demons. They are dark demons, to the point where I went and hung myself, and now I have to live with that because my throat is clenched. You know, so I struggle with breathing problems, even though I've been out in France, you know, in the mountains, and obviously we're going to do this speed match. But I've got to live with that from trying to hang myself. And the audience need to know it ain't a pretty experience. It was only because my then partner knew, and they got the fire brigade and police, and they broke down my garage door. And I woke up literally in A&E with adrenaline in the heart. But I didn't want to be on this planet anymore. And it was for a variety of reasons. It's very powerful. And I had a young daughter, you know, my daughter was born on the same day as me, you know, birthday wise, you know, very blessed in that respect. A young girl who just is not akin to the world. So they have a zest for life where they are learning, and you want to pass that on, but it doesn't matter at that point when you're in darkest death, as Andy touched on. So whether your family are reasoning, there's no reason when you get to them depths.
Let's just quickly talk about that darkness. I'll just give you my low point, just so people out there can hopefully get a better understanding of this, because I didn't, as I said earlier, I didn't have the massive war trauma. I think we were saying earlier, you have traumatic experiences in the military simply because you're around such alpha males, some of whom just aren't very fucking nice. You know, apparently it's changed now, but back in our day, there was fucking bullies. There were people that would go out their way to make your life a misery. And I don't think anyone really got through the military service back then without meeting one of these people.
Oh no, there's certain apples in any walks of life, isn't there? There's the top dog, or who wants to be the top dog, or who's got a reputation,
But fundamentally, Rick, my issue was definitely like that. As a toddler, I went through things a toddler shouldn't have to go through, right? And in that making sense process, which is unfortunate, I'm still here today. I could only crack the chronic depression by injecting Class A drugs. That's what I lived for. The rest of the time, I was on a sofa bed, curtains shut. I starved, literally starved, because I wouldn't eat for anything up to 9 days at a time, because I was spending all my time on the drugs. When the drugs ran out and I'd crash for like 3 days, literally just physically exhausted, like I'd run 10 marathons without eating. I wake up in such a state, I'd have like £1.50 to feed myself for a fortnight. I used to have to shoplift. I lived on pasta and porridge mixed together, because you could buy kilo bags of it for like 20p or something, right? I had track marks all up my arms. It was all myself sort of, myself was gone. I used to shoplift the Bovril so I could buy the cheap white bread. It used to be like 12p a pack in the Co-op, and I'd shoplift Bovril just to have something on it, right? And yeah, so that was my dark point. I have to say, I never thought about killing myself, so I'm guessing I never went as low as and I guess maybe there's so many different combinations of factors there, aren't there? I haven't had your experiences.
Yeah, I want to interject there, because we don't want to lose this point. One of the things I have to say to everybody that help is that there is no point in making comparisons between your experiences and your consequential emotional feelings and anybody else's. Because when I tell people about my experience about the Blue on Blue particularly, they say, yeah, I've had some traumas as well, but nothing as bad as yours. And I say, stop right there. I said, no, we can't compare, because that's unfair. If you've got a problem, it's only relative to you. And everybody's pain threshold is different, and it's no reflection on you as a character. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just your DNA makeup. And so some people handle some things amazingly, other people can't, and that's all there is to it. So you've got to take that objective or subjective element out of it, to be honest, Chris. So whatever it was, mate, your black time was as bad as anybody else's black time. How bad it felt, and it's almost impossible to really explain in words truly what that felt like, but you must have been absolutely desperate. And it's that desperation that leads you to make those decisions in the end, I'm afraid.
Yes, but there seems to be, Andy, we've talked about it, haven't we? Where I've said to you, I'm just tired of life. I am tired of life.
Yeah, I remember you saying it many times.
I've got so you go from one extreme to the other, as in, or spectrum, as I'm going to discuss now, is I've got so much to give in life. Yeah, I'm just tired of life. It's either I'm going to be the best version of me, very cliche, but true, and the potential there for the creative side, or I am going to be dead on my choice. And it's a very sad fact. Very sad, very hard to fathom. Now, if I was speaking like this in the Victorian period, Jesus Christ, it would be One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But there becomes self-analysis as well, Chris. So, there becomes a point, we're not talking a light bulb moment where you need help or someone believes in you, but you don't pick up the phone, you don't answer people, you don't want to get help or change. But yeah, if we think back to our military service, or any military people, or even your listeners who haven't been in the military, there's an inquisitive nature to life to achieve or to do, or out of your comfort zone, that unknown, like going to school for the first time, how you felt, the trepidation. So we have to try and use that to get them feelings of the unknown again. We've already experienced them. So we need to do that to be able to get help. And that is self-analysis. And that's been going, do you know what? I need to step up here. I need a hand. I am suffering. And, you know, there is help out there. But what people need to realize is that you might get the right help at that one moment, but you have to stick with it. I've been on this journey for 11 years. I've never been on medication, but I've gone on the coaching journey. And with what Andy does in the tailored package, and we spoke the other day, me and Andy, as I said, I am trying to implement, and this is a year and a half, nearly 2 years on from being on the program with Andy, the things which we went through on that program, the positive thinking, the guided reflection, the meditation, you know, and bringing in this east west, so the Western lifestyle with the Eastern mentality, so what Andy calls like the Zen warrior. But like anything, to be good at something or for it to work, you've got to practice it. But anything can throw it off as well. I'm only human, you know, but we're trying to establish routines as well, you know, and that goes back to the start of our conversation. So with what Andy's doing, and it is correct, it is right, you know, the simple, the happy trigger, you know, for your audience, I'd like you to explain that one, Andy, you know, because I think it's just so simple but so fantastic.
Yeah, I'd like to get onto that stuff, but mindful that Chris is trying to follow a logical process here, and just sticking with the dark side before we get onto the light side. If we have time, we may have to do another podcast.
Yeah.
When the blue on blue occurred, there was such a shock. It was incomprehensible. The brain couldn't process the information. I couldn't believe what my ears were telling me. And that sense of disbelief, I've never come across anything before or since like it. It was absolutely ultimate. It was so disorientating, you know, it was almost a case of I'd fall over. I could hardly stand up. Everything had capsized. Nothing made sense anymore. That didn't last too long, and that was overtaken by the horror of what we'd actually just done and all the rest of it. And then you get swamped by shame and failure and guilt and all that stuff. It all comes in a big rush. But there was a reason to absolutely focus, because we were in a highly dangerous position, you know, and I could talk all night about that particular night and the events that took place. But the bottom line is I had a job to do, and there were a lot of people relying on me to make decisions. So in a sense, and just touching on what you were saying earlier on, Rick, about as leaders, we have a lot to think about. Yes, but we also have something to bear in mind here. We have a lot to occupy our minds, and that helps us deal with the issues, because we can almost ignore them and just carry on with the job. It's the Marine at the back that's got nothing to do, that has nothing else to do, but other than focus on the realities. And I always felt it's the guys who haven't got the responsibilities who actually have the harder job. But that was 1982. In 1989, so 7 years later, and this is a salient point, because we're talking about when PTSD manifests itself, when people start to recognize the symptoms, and generally it's other people that recognize it before you recognize it yourself. That varies massively, but in my case, 7 years later, I could no longer deny everything that was going on. And the event that triggered off the decision to end my life was my wife deciding to end our marriage. And she had lots of good reasons to do that. She couldn't find any way out of it. It was a desperate situation for her as well. And so in the space of one night, I'd lost everything. I'd lost my wife, my 2 children, my house, everything. And that was the catalyst that took me to the point of deciding there wasn't any point in being here anymore. So there was nobody around me looking at me for decision making or anything like that. And it wasn't too difficult a decision. No, it's the wrong word. It's not a decision at all. I think you're past decision making. I think you're just lost. I just remember being swamped in a sea of absolute abject misery, crying constantly, sitting in the car in a lonely place, thinking about how to die and all the rest of it. And something I've never talked about ever before is actually the process. And you talked about very bravely, Rick, hanging yourself. I decided to drown myself, and did the classic Reggie Perrin thing. Left the clothes on the beach, a place called Budley Salton, and just swam south. But thank God, didn't go too far. There was a turnaround moment when the voices in my head were telling me the reasons to not do it rather than the reasons to do it. Prior to that, the only analogy or visual aid I have to demonstrate this when I'm giving presentations is pictures of somebody doing a spacewalk. And I've got them getting progressively smaller as they move further away from the spaceship, and they look completely lonely. Just this little white spot with a background of millions of stars and nothing else. That's exactly how it felt. There was nothing connecting me to the life that I was still with. And you get to the point where death is actually more appealing than life. You can't wait to get there, almost. That's and even that doesn't sound right. You know, it's almost impossible to describe this, because it sounds like I'm making rational decisions. And I think people who finally go that far don't make rational decisions. They're past that point. They can't make any decisions. There's something else is in control, basically. It's almost an automatic thing. So so for me, you know, that's the lowest I've ever been. And it's still a benchmark in my life. As anything goes wrong, I just think back to that. And a couple of other moments, if I want to, if I don't want to go there, that remind me that life isn't as bad as you thought it was. And it's just that relative comparison that helps you to keep going forward. Yeah, there's plenty of days which are dark and difficult, but nothing quite like that particular moment.
Fellas, can we ascertain here what was our epiphanical, if that's even a word, moment that we realized something had to change, or that we had to take action to keep ourselves on this planet, or in my case, to stop this massive self-destruct mode that I was in?
Well, there was just that little realization that what I was doing was the wrong thing. It was a shocking wake-up call. I can't describe it easily. I can remember seeing the lights of the coast, that part of the world, you know, you're surrounded by lights to the north, Exmouth, to the west, Dawlish, to the south, Torbay. I think there was a ship on the horizon. It was nighttime. It was pitch dark, and I just came to my senses and realized, what the hell am I doing? And I was bloody cold. I mean, this was the day after my 35th birthday in March 1989. And I turned around and swam back, and I had enough energy to do it. I thought, had I gone much further, I would have run out of energy, and that would have been it. So, and that's what I was intending to do. But, you know, it just came to me as a sort of, what am I doing? A kind of woke up moment, you know. So perhaps the cold water helped.
This was actually your moment.
Oh, yeah, an absolute precise moment. It wasn't a dawning or a gradual realization. And in a similar sense, the decision to go this far, or to be this desperate, that was also something that happened quite quickly. It had been growing for years, you know, without me even knowing it in the back of my mind. Looking back now and thinking of some of the comments that I've heard from people I've since spoken to who knew me then, two things. Some people say, yes, we did realize things weren't quite right, but never knew how to say anything. And other people were very surprised. So, wow, I didn't realize you were suffering, you know, and no, I was actually very good at hiding it. And I think this is what the sad fact about suicide is, that people that actually do commit it hide it extremely well. It usually comes as a massive shock to those particularly close to them. You know, and that wasn't the case with me. It was just a sudden realization, I've had enough of this. It's time to go. So
that was the same for me, Andy. You know, when I was on leave for my first attempt, it was a massive shock for, you know, obviously I was still technically serving with 4-5 Commando.
Yeah.
And was in my summer leave, and, you know, and the phone calls I received or text messages from the guys once it went out on the grapevine they were absolutely gobsmacked. They couldn't fathom, or they hadn't seen that, because it was just so out of the blue.
What we tend to do is compensate for the more desperate you are, the more outwardly you make the effort to look normal. So sometimes it's very much like people who laugh in a car accident. And those who don't understand this misread that and think it's either a very callous kind of, you know, insensitive attitude. It's not. It's actually a reaction to shock, and it's a coping mechanism for dealing with what is actually going on inside, which none of us can understand. So it's involuntary. Yeah, and I think on a slightly different scale, those of us that are aware of the increasing issues inside, you can sometimes see them yourself, and yet it's very easy just to turn a blind eye to it and just ignore it and carry on and think, oh, it'll sort itself out, or not even think at all. But suddenly you get to that point where you can't ignore it anymore, which has gradually crept up on me. It took 14 years, I think it was, before I finally accepted there was a problem. But that's what it generally is, Rick. And so people actually see the happy, smiley face, the guy is a soul of the party and spinning dits and all that. Underneath, it's a completely different story. It's 180 degrees in the other direction. And you know what? That's a tearing apart of your psyche. You've got two personalities inside fighting. You've got your core personality. In fact, in many cases, three. Now I think about it, because you've got your genuine character you were born with, Then you've got the effect of childhood, which warps it in some direction if you've had a bad experience, abuse, abandonment, being orphaned or whatever. And people might belittle some of these things and say, oh, well, it's not that bad, really. You can't say that. Everybody's got sensitivities, and a lot of people are not even aware of what those triggers are, but they create a defense mechanism, a pattern of behavior, which becomes your character. Then you get the influences beyond that, which generally happens in school, and hopefully these days nowhere near what it used to be, but obviously a big influence in its own right. Then you've got the military, and that's a huge influence. So you've got these different personalities. And where's the real personality? The core personality is buried under all this other subsequent experience. And that's one of the things I'm trying to help people do in the Mountain Way program we run, is to help people identify where they want to be. Where is that real character? Where's the real Rick Coulson? And Rick's still trying to discover it, mainly through his art, which I think is a fantastic way of doing it, because it's only by asking the pertinent questions, the ones either you've avoided or even in some cases never even realized, is to find those questions, to find the answers, to get back to where you need to be yourself. Because when you're warped by experiences away from yourself, you've got that tearing apart. And this is what I think is the trigger that generates stress, which is probably the biggest cause of all the issues we have with our health, whether it's cancer, diabetes, whatever. All of these things are as a result of something.
But that's what you're doing, isn't it, Andy?
Well, trauma definitely changes you. Trauma definitely changes you.
Yeah,
and that's the fact is you have to learn to understand the new you as well, because you're no longer that person you used to
discover that new you. You're going back to, like, say, what I would want to do, say, for my daughter, is expose her to us many things to try and do, to then, with recommendations, to then let her find her way in life. And I think that's the element of what, you did for me with the creativity side, with, obviously with sculpting to start before it led on to the art, but it started that off to do that journey to find who am I, going back to what you say, who is Rick, who is Andy, who is Chris.
I just want to make a point here, fellas, just because I personally, I think it's so valid and it's so misunderstood, and it goes back a little bit to Andy saying we don't compare our trauma to another. It goes back to Rick saying, well, I signed up for the war. That's what I got, right? I just want to, in defense of children, is my trauma come at an age I didn't decide it. No. I didn't volunteer for it. I won't go into too much detail, but it was put on me at an age where I could make no sense of it whatsoever, right? I'm going to say it. I probably compartmentalized it as that thing, right? That thing that happens. And at that age, you don't have the skills to deal with it. You're not a rational thinking adult. And you carry that through your life until it explodes and comes out. And then you have to try and deal with something that's so deeply ingrained in your behavioral patterns, i.e. underlying anxiety, your whole life. It's in there. It's programmed in your neural pathways from an age where you couldn't unprogram it because you didn't understand it. As an adult, when you experience trauma, you are an adult experiencing it. You have the comprehension. It might be shocking. It might be something that's like left field that you just didn't expect, and it's horrific. Not saying that at all, but adults are adults. And I make this because when people see someone lying in the gutter dying of drugs or alcohol, and they spit, metaphorically spit at them, which is what our society is very much like. And yet they'll see a veteran with their legs blown off and they fucking hero worship them, right? It's like, hang on, that guy in the gutter was a child that had stuff done to him that no adult should ever do to a child. That guy there, he volunteered to go and shoot, Does that make any
No, it does. You've
Sense.
rationalised it very well, and it is correct. It's how society is, or what's been put on them to look down on something which they just think there's a bum, there's a drug user. Go, fucking what do I care about them? But everybody has a story, and each one, going back to what you said, Andy, is you can't compare. Trauma is trauma, irrespective of the incident, but it's traumatic to that person. So then it invokes them feelings to them. But as a common denominator, isn't there? Depression is depression, irrespective of thing. It just so happens that us three are veterans, and us three have had different experiences. I've been on the receiving end of a blue on blue, and thankfully I or my troop didn't get obviously injured. Obviously, Andy's obviously being in the blue on blue, and circumstances at that minute in time, the other team unfortunately fucked up and didn't report the correct position. Yours has come from your childhood, and I think we Andy's a bit older than you, Chris, you're a little bit older than me, but that generation of schooling is a big difference. But the influence of social media and bullying and trolling, I had a conversation with a good friend, Lisa, who works on the farm, and we were discussing obviously certain things, and she just told me, there's the farm at the next farm, the daughter went into the woods and hung herself.
Yeah, it's fucking awful.
Can I just jump in there for a second? Sorry, I want to correct something, Chris, that Rick's just mentioned. It's a misapprehension. I know this is off slightly out of kilter here, but it's important to say this. As a result of the podcast we did last year, a guy who was actually in the blue on blue on the receiving side got in touch with me and corrected what I misunderstood. I just want to be, and you weren't aware of that, Rick, so this is the first time you're hearing this.
Sorry, mate. Yeah.
No, nothing to apologize for, mate. It's important to say this, though, because I did say I'd correct this if it came up, which needs to be said anyway. The other organization that we ambushed was not lost. There were mistakes made, and I don't want to go any deeper into that publicly, but there were mistakes made. But that particular organization didn't make any. It was just a tragic event that unfortunately was probably set in concrete. So exonerate any blame to anybody, but it's an important point for the guys who were actually there. They weren't lost. They weren't unprofessional. They were doing the job exactly right. That's all I want to say. Okay, let's move on.
No, I wasn't trying to say they're unprofessional.
No, not saying you're saying that, Rick. I'm just saying when I explained it to you, I had a very different view of what had happened. As a result of Chris's podcast last year, a man corrected me, and that's one of the great benefits that came out of that. So you can just go to show 30 odd years, 40 years after the event, you still don't know what actually happened.
It's a long
this
time.
actually is a literal part of what we're dealing with here, is that the mysteries of events and traumas is lost in time, and everybody's perception is different. And anybody who's been through a trauma will have completely different views about what actually happened because you're tunnel visioned. And you don't always get the right impression. So clearly I had the wrong one there.
A big part of, if we want to call it recovery, I don't use that word, I just call it experience, but a big part of what people call recovery, you can't play the blame game anyway, can you? That's
no, absolutely not.
People search, don't they, Chris? People can search for answers, but there becomes a point where, answers to certain things are not the key to unlock at that moment in time. The key to unlock is your post-traumatic growth, your growth forward.
If you think of people that, let's take parents, for example, who've lost a child in a hideous event, murdered, for example, and sometimes you hear of people saying they forgive the murderer, and we all look at each other in amazement and think, how on earth, what are they playing at? What they're doing, of course, is they're finding a way forward. They're finding a way to put into perspective what's actually happened. They're not exonerating it. They're not pointing fingers of blame. Neither are they letting anybody off the hook. They're just simply finding a way of moving their own lives forward. Their lives have been changed, completely and totally, and will never go back. But that's the point I'm making. And I think that's what you're saying about there's no point in blaming. Exactly right, because it doesn't solve anything. What it does, in fact, is it perpetuates the problem. If you want to get to a point of release, and I like the idea of experience as opposed to recovery. It's going to make me think that is. You have got to find a way of putting these things into perspective. And they need to be on the tapestry of your life, but in the right time frame. So in other words, in my case, 40 years ago, not today. It's not in my life now. It's a long time ago. I'll never forget it, but it doesn't have the impact it used to have anymore.
You can use it quite you could, you know, to like me, I'm quite a layman with stuff, you know, like things quite explained quite simply, you know, whether all right can be articulated to me, but it's like for your audience to relate to Chris is we go through experiences in life and these traumas and we're trying to deal with them. And people are scared of going back to look at them. I know Andy will touch on this, but it's like you're driving a car. Every now and again, you will look in that rearview mirror or your side mirrors to look back. But you are doing it on your terms, but you are looking back. But you're not concentrating in the mirrors at all times. You are looking forwards, and that is the growth. That your growth is that moving forwards, looking through the windscreen, and then when you need to, okay, or certain things are triggered to take you back there, like Andy covered certain times a year with regards to his incident, is you can look back in that. And Andy said, normally I'll go out into the mountains. So he's in charge of it. It's not now in charge of him. Yeah. And that's the turnaround for his growth.
What I just want to give an example here of how differently I cope with stuff as an adult, probably off the back of all my experiences, as opposed to how I couldn't cope with it back in that dark period that I talked about. And that's when my best mate Lee drowned on our holiday. And we took liquid acid at this party in Portugal. And in a nutshell, fucking hell, we was off our heads to the point where it wasn't normal. Both of us smashed out unconscious, come around like half an hour later. And no, it's not normal to go unconscious from LSD for anyone that's listening, but we did. I woke up, I was just on these rocks. I guessed I was on the lake shore. We were by a beautiful lake. I could hear Lee moaning. I said, Lee, you all right, man? You all right? He said, no, I'm not. I said, come on, let's get back to the tent. Anyway, cut long story short, I gradually come out of that shocked state, but Lee didn't. He went into some sort of psychosis and literally just went mental for the evening. So I'm trying to control him while I'm absolutely off my fucking head. I can't stress that enough, right? He's running up to people and punching them. I won't go into the depths of what went on because it with respect to my mate, but it was fucking horrible. And in that morning, French girl come over and she said, hello, do any of you have a friend with a tattoo? And I just looked at her and I said, is he dead? She went, just get down to the left. I said, just tell me, is he dead? And 5 minutes before this girl had come up, all these ambulances had just come hammering down to this idyllic lake in Portugal, just out the blue, 4 ambulances, 3 police cars. And I turned to the lad we're with, I said, he's dead. Nah, fuck off, Chris. Don't you? I said, no, what? Why? That they haven't come down for someone's sunburn, have they? Right? He's either dead or he's killed someone. And this French girl come over and she said, just get down to the lake. So off my nut, I had to walk along this lake shore. All the campers, the revelers, the festival goers were just stood there, just mouths open because they all knew what had happened, right? Walked up to one of the ambulance guys and I said, is my mate dead? He said, yeah. I said, can I go and see him? He went, yeah. Walked over and they'd laid this sheet over Lee. And I just pulled the sheet back. There's my best mate dead. And I give him a kiss. I said, Lee, you fucking idiot, man. Put that sheet down. we then had to go for the we then had to go to the police station, give all the statements, all of that. Are you aware? Had he taken any? Just all that kind of stuff. Then got back to a hotel. Then we had to go and see him in the morgue. By the time we got to see him, they'd done the autopsy. So that was, I've never seen anything like that. It looked like Frankenstein's monster, all these stitches like that big, all across his body. Then the embassy is desperately, or the consulate is desperately trying to get hold of his family because we didn't have a phone number for them. That fucking phone rang in the hotel room. Oh my God. The other lad picked it up, and you're never going to forget that scream down the phone when we had to tell his family he's fucking gone, right? And then you have all the, I don't know if you call it the inquest, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, the point I'm getting to is when I look down and I'll see my mate dead, I'll put that sheet down and I'll put it out of my mind. And I went on and I'll smash my life, right? People say, oh, you got all this trauma. Fuck off. We was adults. We went to a party. We both knew the score. Lee died. That's it, right? I can clinically, pragmatically compartmentalize that just as simple as I've just said. But the childhood stuff, it's fucking there for life. Something I have to deal with, you know, on a daily basis, moment by moment. So what am I trying to say?
Don't interrupt you, Chris. Does it, you've just said that is with you. So that's, it's not me saying, oh, I understand or comprehend, because I don't, but your mentality is saying already, before you've given yourself a chance to heal or move on or grow, is from your childhood, you're saying that's with you for life.
Yeah, I
so mindset wise, you're already defeating yourself.
No, I don't. No. Let's not.
Am I wrong here? Sorry, have I listened to that?
No. Let's not overanalyze it. What I mean is it's from such a young age. Let's not get biological, but I'm talking neural pathways here. Fuck me, 52 now. So we're talking like 48 years later.
Are you just saying, right? you are now, I don't know what word to use, Chris, is acceptance of it, of that it's going to be there with you, not acceptance of whatever happened, as I'm saying.
I think moreover it, I'm just trying to paint the picture for people of like not to fucking gloss over this childhood fucking trauma thing, which everybody seems to, and because that's, don't get me wrong, I've got a perfect life. I live in paradise. I wouldn't change any of it. It's fucking all irrelevant. I've lived the best life, if I was honest, out of everybody I've ever met. I've smashed all my goals. I've got a family that it's just like fucking hell. I can't believe they're mine, right? And it's all come off the back. So it is all good. I just wanted to, I don't know if juxtapose is the right word, those two situations where as an adult, I can deal with something just like that. No, not going there. Sorry. No trauma, no baggage, no whatever it might be. But how powerful the stuff during your formative years it is. Yes. Sorry, didn't mean to talk as long.
No, I'm just trying to understand that.
You know,
I'm just trying to understand, because everybody's different. Chris, it's a very powerful statement to say this will be with me for life. You know, because obviously I battle my own struggles every day still. I was saying to Andy, it doesn't matter how successful I will ever be, whatever success I measure, or however you measure success. To me, it's being happy in what you do. Like you say, your paradise. but it's still going trying to understand the struggles. Sometimes maybe I look at it too in depth, or to try and not find reason, but to try and understand what's actually going on in here, in my brain. And then so listening to you, it's actually really gone, right, wow, that's a powerful statement you've just said. My ears pricked up even more listening to your story when you said that. And there will be things which your audience are listening to which will resonate with them and say, I feel like that, or I've been through that. But, you know, how do we get to then, we've discussed the depression side of it, or like you just said, the epiphany of what woke you up, which was obviously once you put that, you know, blanket back down over your friend. This is so how do we grow?
Yeah. Again, I'll say this again. I don't know if I made it clear, but I'm just trying to show, like, as an adult, how if you get your mind right, you can fucking deal with anything, right? If you get your mind right, you get your philosophies right, you understand the universe, you understand your place in it, you understand the temporal nature of these atoms that people call crisp. Whereas compared to something when you're a kid, toddler, how utterly confusing that is. And then you take that into something as combustible as the armed forces and have it, you know, compounded in some way, or even, I don't know, even that period of your life where you don't have to think about that, how all that sort of affects and results in what it is that we're all talking about today.
Well, the thing is, your childhood experiences are the foundation. You know, when we come out the womb, we're a blank sheet of paper, and somebody is writing on that for quite a long time, you know, probably up until your teenage years. It's a gradual process of you establishing more control and other influences having slightly less. But in those first formative years, there's various views about how long the child should be actually in childhood. In my life, it was considered 7. At the age of 7, you were okay. You could go off to boarding school and face the rigors of life. When my lad got to 7, I looked at him and I wondered how on earth my parents did it. There's no way I could have done it. But they were doing it for the right reasons. It was considered to be the proper way to bring people up. And I can't argue with that. So, you know, but those first 7 years, the foundations that they laid are so solid that's enabled me to see all these things and deal with them and get to where I am. I had one guest who was born, his mother was Irish, and to give birth in the 50s in Ireland illegitimately was an absolute no-no. So she moved to Scotland where her sister was and gave the baby to her sister. Her sister, unfortunately, was a very horrible woman, and the baby was used as a sort of whipping boy. And it wasn't until I think he was 14 that he found out that his mother was actually his aunt. And the girls he thought were his sisters were in fact his cousins, and they'd basically brought him up. And there were stories of him living in parks in Glasgow where he'd been kicked out by the mother, and the sisters bringing him food and blankets and things like this. This was his normal upbringing. Now, that was his foundation. And part of the problem with the PTSD was helping him to understand why he was susceptible to certain things which other people didn't have problems with. And it's simply because the foundations were laid wrong, completely wrong. When I actually spelt out for him what I felt about his mother, irrespective of the circumstances that drove her to make those decisions, that came as a total revelation to him. And it was necessary to do that to help him put it into perspective, because otherwise he was going to grow up with this massive inferiority complex. And as a result of that, he was just getting nowhere in life and achieving absolutely nothing. And this had characterized his life in the armed forces as well. You know, he never got above the rank of private. So, you know, the foundations are critical. And if you're unfortunate enough not to have a good upbringing, that's the problem you've got to deal with. It'll affect everything throughout your entire life. So it's important to find a way of helping people get to that point, to discover who they truly are, and to understand that their behaviors or attitudes are not natural, but they've been forced on them by those events.
Andy, can I say, just for clarity here, like, I've completely accepted my life, all of it. I wouldn't change. Well, some of the knobhead things I've done over the years, I might change. I never wanted to upset people, but you know, this isn't like a woe is me. No, nothing at all. I have the best life ever. I literally do. and I've been through some shit, probably at an age when you shouldn't have done.
But didn't you say just now, Chris, you were still having problems dealing with your childhood?
No, I don't have problems. What I'm saying, it's still with you. Those experiences, you can't like take them out, put them in a little box, lock it, throw it in the river, and yay.
Soul. You're saying it's part of your soul, right?
Yeah, it's
memory. You can't just wipe memory out, can you, without a frontal lobotomy or something?
Yeah,
so absolutely right. But the key to it is actually putting it into perspective. So it's just
perspective.
Yeah.
I
helped that guy by saying, let's look at it from your mum's point of view. Why did she make those decisions? And what? So, you can chase this argument right back to Adam and Eve. It's the history of the human race. Conflict is part of our existence. Friction. We wouldn't exist without it. And it's in everything we look at. And that's why Rick knows perfectly what I'm going to say next. The one word that we use more than the else was balance. And it's about understanding balance and how it functions and how we function because of it and all the rest of it. So in other words, what we're saying here is if you're going to understand your background, your childhood, and the reasons why things badly happen to you, you need to go beyond that and look at the reasons that caused it. And then you need to forgive. And that's the other big thing, is learning how to forgive your mother for the mistakes she made, because they weren't mistakes. She had to make decisions. And once you do that, the pressure's gone. And then it's no longer the big bogeyman sort of at the back of the brain, sort of lurking there, waiting to ambush you every time you have a bad day. You can achieve all this. And, it's perfectly feasible, but you need a logical process.
Yeah,
and I think you need to be guided.
We've all done it. When I look at people that let's say hurt me, I just see myself in them. I see a lost boy that probably didn't get the love from his father that he should have done. And I completely get it. I have no feelings of malice.
But then it goes back, doesn't it, Chris, to those who are not on anyone's radar or just get to that point where they've just gone and taken their life is there's a point where, right, where's this intervention then? Where's this awareness to go, right, if you're experiencing this? But Andy touched on it as well. There's no rationale at that point.
Well,
the demon and the angel, they aren't even applicable.
We got to interject a positive here, because I've had lots of people write to me, especially during this recent, if I say 2 years of nonsense, everyone knows what I'm on about. And they've written to me and said, Chris, you saved my life. I don't mean like me, but having the podcast, listen to what you're saying, putting a few strategies in. And I know that you guys are doing the same for your, for your crew. And so hopefully we're turning people around at some point on that journey. How you get the people that in that real darkness, it's that thing that you literally would be good if you could be there, isn't it? And just change a few of their paradigms in that moment, just a little gem to get someone thinking, I ain't thought of that. Do we have any thoughts on I mean, everyone says keep an eye on your oppo and this is so true, but I'll give you a silly example. Someone challenged me to do this 22 push-ups a day or whatever it was back along. Was it for 22 suicides a day in America or something? So I did it on the first day. I did it on the second, did it on the third. Fourth day, something happened in my personal life. And it was just like, right, I'll put that on the back burner. I'll do double tomorrow or something, right? Next day after, I was having the repercussions of this thing so back burner again. Come the third day, I thought, I got 2,500 people on my Facebook. Not one single person wrote to me, and I'm not saying that they all saw that I was doing these press ups, right? But not one single person wrote to me, and Chris, what happened with the press ups? Not a single person. And do you know what? I fucking stopped doing them. Because I thought something about this is horseshit. We're not keeping an eye on our own. You're
getting very confused here with all sorts of things. Social media is not the way to solve these problems in any sense. From my perspective, advertising what we do and trying to raise money, yes, it's useful from that point of view. Keeping a finger on the pulse with people like Rick, for example, who's posting stuff about his art. That's really great as well. Very, very useful. But in terms of actually finding a solution, no good whatsoever. And this is why I came to a conclusion that the standard methods, things like CBT and EMDR, what have you, whilst they do help an awful lot of people, for complex military PTSD, I think they're pretty inadequate. You've got to come at this from an holistic point of view. And we've touched on the whole, well, we've more than touched, we've discussed quite a bit the childhood influences. We've got a bit of a graphic insight from Rick about the realities of war on the battlefield. Put those two things together, you've already got very complex situation. Then you add to it the individual's personality. Some people find the moral issues very difficult to cope with. Other people have got practical reasons for finding difficulties. Then you've got real life, which we're all suffering. And COVID is just the latest example. You know, there are layers of problem. Now, if you're going to just stick a plaster on top of this with a bit of therapy session, don't be surprised if it doesn't do much for you, because at the end of the day, you know yourself better than anybody else, and you can only judge yourself, and nobody can tell you whether you're better or not. And let's not ever use the word cure, because that doesn't exist in this game. So the bottom line is you've got to get to the bottom of the problem. And if that means going back to childhood and starting to unravel those problems before you can deal with the issues that were generated in the military, you know, so be it. And this is why my program takes a minimum of 2 months. You've got to build a level of trust with whoever you're helping, which is why I work on a one-to-one basis, never a group, which many people have suggested just wouldn't work. You've got to get to that level of intimacy before you can expect anybody to start opening up their real heart to the problems that they sometimes don't even know that exist themselves. Then you can start dealing with them. And the dealing with them isn't complex. It's really what we're doing now. This conversation will probably help an awful lot of people simply by listening to the things you've said, because it's an echo and they go, right, I'm not alone in this. I'm not actually going mad. You know, somebody else understands. Once that understanding is there, well, then you're off. Then you can reach the stars, and it's surprising what comes out. But you need the time for that, you see. So a 45-minute session in somebody's clinic is not enough, which is why Rick and I went to the mountains for 15 days. And by golly, we didn't stop talking, did we, Rick? I mean, we fitted quite a few other things in as well.
But there's with what you did is, you know, and what you're doing, and you are right, Andy, you know, it needs to be tailored to the individual now for those who've gone through, say, the NHS. And it's no disrespect, it's just numbers. They cannot deal with them numbers. Whereas where Andy's coming from, he's got a team behind the scenes, like the clinical psychologist, psychiatrist, who tailors the program from the individual, from the information which has been from the individual and from Andy. And then Andy delivers this content, but it's got the content as a framework and structure to it, but it's also been tailored to you. And then with Andy's own personal experiences, so you're now relatable, you now got rapport, because there's mutual respect. We're going, he's been through the journey, you know, of life and his experiences. And then, so when you are speaking with someone who relates to the feelings you are trying to portray to them as the sufferer, there is enlightenment, there is going right. And in the setting which Andy says is it just allows you to open up fully. No judgment, Andy says, no expectation. And that's crucial, because there's things which, obviously certain things that you mentioned, which are personal to you. It could be from your childhood or from war. And you don't want that thrown back, because you might have opened up before to someone and they've, you know, and you just think, right, I ain't ever opening up again then, because they've, you know, thrown that back to me, or they've used that as a mechanism, maybe from a toxic relationship, for example. So with what that no expectation and no judgment with Andy, it allows you properly, and that's why I mentioned the certain thing about, you know, the eulogy. But that was traumatic for me. Really, you know, I broke down on this walk with Andy, and he says, you know, it's about an hour and a half just gone. We've just walked the whole lake. And we sat and we had a man hug. I mean, this is before me and Andy, you know, made it legendary. We had a proper man hug, and I can feel myself welling up now, Chris, yeah, and I'm only human, yeah. Maybe this man's man hug from the Marine. But it was, and it was a beautiful moment as we just sat there and watched the gliders taking off into the mountains. But this weight, this weight shift from me, God, imagine carrying the heaviest, struggling constantly with this certain baggage, and then it just floating off like a hot air balloon.
And that's generally what I've experienced with people I've helped. There comes that, and you talked about epiphany moment earlier on. This is the genuine epiphany moment, which is going in the opposite direction, the positive direction. The negative one that leads to the contemplation or even attempt of suicide is the other side. But this is the light side, and it is a beautiful thing. And again, we're back to balance. If you understand the function of these negative things in your life, it enables you to then appreciate the other side, which actually happens. I took one guest into the mountains. We went out for a night camping. He'd been a bit reticent about one issue in Afghanistan that was bugging him. So when we had a formal discussion about this in a very secluded little place, he broke down. But it turned out that that wasn't the real issue. As a result of that, when we went camping just for one night with a classic sort of Ginganguli by a stream with a fire and all that stuff under the stars, he suddenly stood up and started talking about it. And I was lying on my side with my back to the stream with the fire in front of me. I had my head on my arms like this. And I was thinking to myself, for God's sake, don't go on too long. My back was freezing. The wind changed direction. The smoke blew in my eyes. I was now sweating here and freezing there. I was coughing and my arm went dead. And he was totally oblivious. He was just talking the issue through to the stars. I had to lie there and endure this for about an hour until it had run its course. And there were no tears. There was no reaction. He'd done all that previously. He said, that's it. It's done and dusted. And he's now got a great life. His family's reunited. His children are fabulous and having a great life and all the rest of it. You know, he turned the corner very quickly. And that's all it takes, really.
You're still going to go through life. It's understanding that you're still going to have life struggles, life's roller coaster of emotions. That
normal
is
life. Normal life.
That's normal. Yeah. But when you are going through this depression, it just feels as if everything's depressed, everything, your mindset.
Well, what you do is you just ignore it. I mean, I went into isolation. It wasn't exactly isolation terms that you were referring to, Rick, where you were literally stuck indoors for years. I actually jumped on an old wooden boat and sailed. That's my factory default setting, if you like the sea. But, you know, essentially I was running away. I had no phone. I had no comms of any sort. And I lived on that old wooden thing for 18 years. That's how I ended up out here. I wasn't alone either. This is an important point. I have the most wonderful person in the world, my wife, Shirley. And she, you know, the term rock is a bit misused nowadays or overused, but she's more than that. You know, she's the center of my universe. And she's nothing special. She's very modest. She'd say the first thing herself, you know, well, nothing special, but she is. She's more than special, you know. And I think that's another big factor. A lot of guys suffering from this don't have that in their lives. They've lost the family what they want and cherished. Perhaps some of them are full of regret because they didn't cherish it enough when they had it. And that's normal. I was exactly the same. But, you know, again, if you can get past that point of turning that corner, the next time you get a relationship, by golly, you're going to look at it in a very different way than you did beforehand. And it isn't about the size of her boobs or the color of her hair. It's something inside that really resonates. That's what really matters. And when you've made that decision, I think you're now in the area of the advanced Zen warrior. You've now got wisdom.
Is it right? We point, I mean, you say, Andy, she's the center of your universe. She's the center of our universe, mate, isn't she? We've got lovely people on this planet. We've got veterans that are just freaking awesome. Well, I'm talking to two.
Fair one.
Two today. Sorry, I'm starting to lose it now. But for people watching this that might be struggling, you know, we are here for you, and there are lots like us. You are not on your own. You got to get out of you thinking in your bubble that maybe your life's all not going right, and just realize there are people out here and that we're here for you, and we can. You know, we can
Andy needs more awareness of what he's doing, you know, and obviously you are a mechanism, Chris, to channel that, and rightly so, and hence why you've got him on for a second time, not just because I don't think it would have mattered if it would have been, you know, as successful as the first one was. I think there needs to be a change in how we approach mental health and our society approaches it, but you know, this is about an individual getting the help they need, and it needs to be tailored to them. And there's people like Andy who are using them from a life journey with clinical help. Now, that doesn't get any better to me, doesn't sound any better. I was very apprehensive about going on that. You might think, oh, I'm going to go to France for a 2-week jolly. It's not a jolly. Yes, it's in a beautiful location, and there's only so many bacon and egg sandwiches I could get from Andy in the morning. I could stomach it, right? Sound perfect. But, he's there to do something. And I was challenged, and I challenged Andy, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Not challenged in the wrong way. It's just that you're trying to comprehend certain things. So it is alien, just like your feelings are when you are down. So by what it's doing and the awareness and rightly so the publicity to which it gets is that is saving one life. And now to some other people that might not mean much because we don't know them, but I'd rather have a person who comes back through having gone through things in life. Because when you read about success stories, and it's not measured in a monetary term, achievements with what they want to do and achieve, it's phenomenal. But then it cascades and it resonates with people. So it then helps someone again. And we need to, it's like putting the news on. I don't put the news on anymore because it's just all bad. When you're in that positive mindset, and I know I'm on about struggles and I still struggle with certain stuff, but when we're in the positive mindset of stuff, you look at stuff in a good way. So it should be, right, that glass is not half empty. It's got to be that black and white sometimes. It's half full. And when you use certain mediums, like you said, with social media to a good avail, and that's how they should be used, whether it be raising awareness of things, but on a personal level, as well as keeping in touch with, but it's just got lost in translation somehow from what it, an extended form of Friends Reunited.
Yeah, my little chip in there is I deactivated the Facebook. I don't think it's healthy. Right. This is just, if you've got your 30 crew on there and that's it, that's fine. But when you're in the public eye, you just get friend requests from fucking everywhere. I wouldn't mind if people sent a little message to say how they know you or why they want, but that's gone out the way. All that etiquette and humanness, it's just someone hitting a button there, right? I obviously got my professional page. And I will say, Rick, I've put my personal page back on because of our fundraising, right? But I found it a massive relief to deactivate. It's just one of those moments in life you just realize you've done the right thing. It was just the right thing. But just moving on, I want to finish on a positive. I want to promote Andy's services, so the Mountain Way. Obviously, for friends listening, there'll be a link below. Andy's a very personable guy, as you know. So if you mail him, you are going to get a reply. I know that because I've been asked for Andy's contact details several times now. Rick, I want to talk about your wonderful artwork before we finish. Before we come on to those two areas, I'm just going to say one thing here. My epiphany was when I realized I was punishing the person that had already been punished enough. It's kind of that simple. In fact, if you want to get really as it was, it's like when I was that little boy, I didn't deserve that shit, adult doing that to, it was a fucking horrible time in the 70s for many of us folks. If you're listening, it just was. But here's the thing: as an adult now, shoving needles in my arms 12 times a day or whatever, who was punishing that little? I was doing it to myself now, wasn't I? And that was when I woke up and went, Chris, stop doing it to yourself. And then I had that relief, Rick, that you described, that weight lifting off my shoulders. And as I said, my life's never been the same. It was my life from that moment was on the up. So what, Rick's just going to get a glass of water. What can we say, Andy, to people that might be struggling, or people that might be supporting someone that's struggling?
Okay, mate. Sorry to put you under this pressure. I have to leave in 11 minutes. So I'll say the things that I think are important at this stage. If you want to have a subsequent podcast to talk in more detail, I'm very happy to do that.
I just wanted to finish on a positive because it's been quite heavy.
Absolutely right. Yes. I'm looking at a board now behind the computer with 40 odd names on it. 2 of those names came through your podcast last year, and they're now actively in the program. The time it takes varies from every single person. One guest took 3 years to actually make the decision to come on the program. Now, what's the point I'm making? The point I'm making is you probably know you've got a problem, but either you're not really sure how to deal with it, you've tried other things, it didn't work, or you're too worried about going there. Or if that's not the case, just ask yourself if those around you think there's a problem, but you're not prepared to accept it. And those would be the closest, your partners, your wife, children, parents, what have you. If you're totally on your own, unless you are a genuine hermit, then I would say there is a problem. And you need to do some internal thinking about whether or not you're going to spend the rest of your waking days this way, or whether you want to finally make an effort to get out of it. Now, it does take an effort, no doubt about it. And Rick can talk about this afterwards. It took Rick some effort because there were lots of things in his life that weren't right at the time, which he was trying to cope with at the same time. So it was an awful lot of stuff, and it all builds up, and it becomes to the point where it's almost unworkable. So I understand the pressure it takes. It's really difficult. And that's why there's no judgment and there's no expectation. And some of those names will stay on that board indefinitely. I'm quite sure of it. Some of them will never actually come on the program, but we are here if they want it. So the first point I want to make is the choice is yours. If you want help, it is there. But if you're not prepared to go for it, you're never going to get it. The second thing is, provided you're a bona fide veteran and that you have been diagnosed by a competent authority with PTSD, then you're eligible to come onto our program. But the only question we have is that, will you step up to the plate? Will you actually engage in the program? And will you take on board the things I'm going to show you? And will you, as Rick said earlier on, practice, practice, practice? There's no magic cure to this. There's no instant solutions. It does take time. It took me over 30 years. I can guarantee if you follow what I say, it'll take you a fraction of that. But you have to put the effort in. And it basically means you've just got to go wholeheartedly go for it. There's no medication of any sort involved. You probably are on medication, and that's normal. And that's a very important element. If you're going to come off medication, then it has to be under the supervision of your GP. Can't be done by yourself, and certainly not by me. But that's probably a goal you want to achieve. I had one guest who was on 27 pills a day. He's now down to 10, and he's feeling a lot happier about himself. So you can achieve all these things, but it's got to be done in a proper structured fashion. There is a program here. Once you've gone through what we call the experience, I don't use the word course because to us in the military, that has lots of connotations. So it's just an experience. But once you've gone through that, you're into the post-traumatic growth phase where Rick is now. And we will continue to support you in whatever direction you're going in. We're not the experts in everything, but we have people that can help if you've got issues to do with finances, housing, professions, relationships, and so on. So there's a solution to all your problems. But the key to it is that you have got to want to make the changes. And if you can't do that, there's nothing anybody can do for you, least of all us. So that's the critical point. As for when you come and do it, it's up to you. Just pick up the phone or get on the email, which Chris will put at the bottom here, and just get in touch. I am a one-man band, so I can't deal with hundreds of people. It's a slow process, but by God, it's a lot quicker than the one I went through. And it will, once you get onto the program, or once you actually get into contact with us, it will stop you going down that really dark pit where there's no return. All right. So life won't get better for a while, but once you get into the program and you go through it, it will get better very quickly. The choice is entirely yours. And
you're always going to signpost people, Andy, if you can't help them, aren't you? You're going to point.
Well, usually what's happened, Chris, is that we're at the end of the queue. And again, that's totally understandable, partly because we're not so widely known, which I like. I don't want hundreds of people flooding. You know, we can't handle the numbers. We don't have other mentors. We're trying to find people to replicate, but we're not at that point yet. That's one issue. The other one is quite simply that they've tried everything. And this is why it takes a while to get people to commit, because they've lost their faith in everything. They don't believe that there's any solution out there. And it takes a while to turn people around and say, look, you can change things. So signposting back to the NHS. They've already done that to combat stress. They've been there, whatever it is that you think that they would go to, it doesn't work. But what I can say is that everybody that's come to me has moved on. They've got their life back into traction again. They're achieving some of their goals. Again, there's no judgment here. So what constitutes happiness or let's say some kind of peaceful equilibrium might not appear to me, but it's what appears to them. So as long as people are achieving what they want in life, it doesn't matter whether they're overweight or underweight, that's their choice. Whether their diet's good or bad, whether they continue with alcohol or they knock it on the head totally, it's their choice entirely. But the thing is, they're back in control. That's the key to it, you see. The PTSD is not controlling them, they're controlling it. And just the final point I want to make is you can eradicate the bulk of it, not just bits and nibbling away at the edges. You can get rid of, I would say, the most toxic elements. But there was always going to be certain conditions, certain things that you're going to need to be aware of. And likewise, there might be triggers as well. Something that somebody says or something you see or whatever that will trigger off a reaction. If you follow the program, you'll be able to deal with those reactions. You'll be able to take control of them and get back in the chair and life carries on.
Yeah, but, and I've still got the booklet, I've still got the booklet.
No, I just should also chip in and say, folks, if you're watching this now, I've got a commando coach playlist on my YouTube channel. I've never had therapy. I've never had any kind of professional help. I've never been to a support. Well, I went to AA once and thought, fuck that, right? Not dissing AA. That's another story again. My philosophies, I've had to come up with them, and they work obviously because I'm here and I smile every day. So if you are struggling, just check out my Commando Coach playlist. There'll be a few little gems in there that you won't probably have ever heard before, and you'll go, right. But one of the biggest hitters in that playlist is, I think it's called Breaking the Chains of Addiction. And I get written to by people that say, Chris, I've been in drug counseling 12 years. Why have they never, ever said any of this? You've made more sense in a half-hour video than they have in 12 years. And it's just because I know a bit about this life, let's say. So if you are struggling, there's always go to that first. Going to come back to Rick here and talk about your wonderful poppies. Rick is an artist. He creates these beautiful things. Have you got one you can show us, Rick?
I have, yeah. And I just say this idea. Just
Andy, are you out of here?
Sorry to cut in. I'm sorry to cut in there. I've got to say cheerio at this point. Chris, we'll have a chat later on if you want to explore any other things, mate. But thank you for this opportunity. Much appreciated. And good luck to you, Rick. We'll be in touch.
Cheers, Andy. Cheers, mate. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Andy.
This idea came from Andy, Chris, with whilst I was on the Mountain Way program and exploring the creativity side. My mum was a very talented artist, and I did bits of drawing, but I never drew. And Andy suggested sculpting clay, and this was to bury one of the demons, like a final ceremony of some of the traumas I'd experienced. And I came up with the idea of a poppy, and I'd actually, on my last tour of Afghanistan, brought some of the very earth back. So I thought, right, I'll sculpt a poppy and I'll sprinkle it with the earth, and that with some other things will get buried on top of the mountain at 9,000 feet, and I've now refined the product, and what I do is I sculpt the poppy by hand, and then with a regimental button, and sprinkle it with the earth from now. It stemmed from Afghanistan, differing conflict earths and sands. So you can see some of the jars behind me.
What's Chris, it made out of, mate? What's the actual?
It's made out of air-dried clay. I sculpt it, dry it, and then paint it with multiple layers, and then it's actually got a brass button in the center. And I do it with a presentation box, and it's called the Conflict Poppy Collection. Wow. For your audience. And it's an ethical box, sourced eco-friendly company. And I now have over 30 odd different conflict earths and sands from across the globe, and I'm still acquiring more. And what this allows me to do with the creativity and some of the art, I haven't got some art here, but I donate to charity of the buyer's purchaser's choice. So whilst being free within my creativity side, doing the sculpting and the artwork, it also allows people that nostalgia of having a keepsake from their time or a family member's time. And I've done poppies for people, you know, family members who've lost loved ones in war. I've got a lot of them on my business pages and my personal page. And then the small donation to charity of the buyer's choice is just don't get any better than that for me, Chris.
Yes.
And then we read up on the units, read up on the battles. I'm trying to get into America. I've got some contacts. I'm just about to get some sand from Iwo Jima, from a US Marine. You know, so every earth and sand I've got is all got provenance for those who are sending it in to me. So,
so just to clarify, you don't make money on this. This is all.
It basically, its proceeds of profit go to charity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just clarify.
Yeah. I'm not a charity. I'm not a not-for-profit organization. I am a company, but because Chris, I've received help, so I want to give help back now. Yes, I've been involved with a couple of charities, and over the years I have raised tens of thousands of pounds for charity. But it's just that good full circle of being able to not just give back or pay it on, but maybe helping someone who I've never met and could save their life. And charities do need, I know it's thrusting a lot of people's faces nowadays, but charities do need help. So if you imagine being in a world where you purchase a product and then some of that money goes to help someone else and it hasn't cost you any more, well, that makes it a wonderful place, a wonderful world to be.
Yes, exactly. It's funny, isn't it, how we have this need to give back when we've been through trauma. We come out of trauma seeing the world differently, don't we?
We do, because and when you've had near-death experiences or you've been humbled by traumas from other people or your own, you want to, there becomes a reasoning inside, isn't there, to say, right, I don't want anyone else to suffer like this. Can we help, and how can we do it? We can do it in different mediums, where your self-awareness and your charity challenges. I did a charity challenge 7 years ago, trying to walk the length of Britain backwards, you know, for a cancer charity and a small marine charity. And it was on the back end of my mum just obviously passing from being terminally ill. And I believed in this small, and still do believe in this small marine charity and what they stand for, because 100% goes to them. And yeah, so it was a 350th anniversary at course. So I did 1,664 kilometers on the treadmill. And then obviously went up to John O'Groats and got down to Perth, and injury and lack of support stifled that world record attempt. But you know,
bloody hell, mate, you don't want to come down that A9 backwards. I've done it.
I've done it. The whole A9, more or less.
I'm surprised you're not stuck to the front of a juggernaut now.
Well, the police kept stopping me, to be honest, Chris. But I tell you what, you had some of the jocks shouting out at the vans, "You need your head checking." And I'm like, you're telling me, mate, but you know what? It got awareness because it was so different. And in the media that people donate, and there were farmers stopping the tractors, getting the little one to jump out. You know, if they had the child working with them, giving me 40 quid, for example. So I'd do a live and say, I've just had 40 quid donated. You know, we're amazing, Chris. People support.
People are, you know, there's a lot of wonderful people. I was camping in Wick, isn't it? Wick is the first.
Wick is the first. It's about 30 miles. Yeah, it's the last stop before you go up to John O'Groats. Yeah.
Yeah, So I'd run from John O'Groats that afternoon to Wick that evening, and I was just got my tent up in this park. Suddenly the bloody blue lights came. These two coppers come charging across the grass with flashlights, and I'm thinking, oh, and I'm gonna be arrested before I've even bloody begun. And they went, "It's you. You're that guy." I'm like, "What guy? We seen you running from John O'Groats."
Yeah. I mean, it is barren up there, and the police will stop you just in case you do get, obviously.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize it's all free land up. It's called it's common land up there. No one, you can camp where you like. You can even camp on someone's like garden or their farm or something.
Well, I run supported as well. You know, like yourself. You know, it wasn't like these celebrity challenges you get where they're in ice baths, hotels, hot meals. I were on rations.
Yeah.
With a sleeping bag, and you imagine how you can't. I was seizing up in my bivvy bag and that, literally seizing up. At one point, my uncle in the car, he slept in the car, I slept outside, you know, as you do. And then, so you know, you're obviously trying to get the carbs and everything down you, but rations wise, which wasn't a bad thing, you know, for logistics wise, but just that thing to give back. I mean, this was 7 years ago. Technically, I wasn't giving back at that point. I was giving, you know, because I hadn't received help or charities then. It was just my thing to help charities. And God, it's something which I will do for the rest of my life. You know, I don't have to give profits from here, but I do. And we're creating, you know, we're keeping history, Chris. And you know, if you think back to how many conversations we would just love to have with First World War veterans and Second World War veterans now, you imagine the stories from them, because I mean, there's a massive following with military history anyway. So to document it in different ways now, like with the Earths and Sands and the regiments, and then doing it for people who are then giving me stories, I just put little bits into their information as well as the factual information. So it becomes educational and informative. Regards to the losses as well, for example. So I'm researching them, not just the losses and the official government stats. It's not just a number. I'm then breaking it down into regiments and then subcategories from there, because it is personal. There's a personal story or there's a tragedy behind that loss, you know. And I'm trying to work on a since World War II project now where we've had 30 medal qualifying criteria since then, and it's like Malaya's the biggest casualty losses we've lost since World War II, which was 1,442 personnel, and like Ireland was 1,441.
Oh,
you know? Yeah, and so you're finding information like that. I'm trying to source. So if there's any of your audience around the world who'll pay for the postage, can get me Earths and Sands from prominent battles, not just from since Second World War, but any time, then we're creating a living museum.
Earth and Sand, folks, in case you didn't hear. Rick, am I right thinking this has brought you in contact with some fairly high profile people on your journey?
Celebrities, especially Instagram. So I mean,
am I the biggest one?
You're the biggest one on Instagram, Chris. I'm Facebook, to be fair, but the author Damian Lewis, who's put me out a few times, and he's got a couple of the poppies. He sent me a signed book. Chris Ryan on Instagram. Foxy, Jason Fox, he's got one. Aldo, Ken, obviously. I mean, the Marines are a small community, hasn't it, from that period of time. Will Carlin, the former England rugby captain as well, he's just reposted me night before last, actually. I mean, so it's slowly gaining you know yourself, Chris. You get a bit of celebrity sport, like say with Robbie Williams and stuff. It just helps push what you do, or it just gives you a bit of authenticity. Now, I'm just trying to, in my own way, honor those who've sacrificed their all, but also you're creating a keepsake and a gift. I mean, if you think when we pass, how much stuff gets passed on. Not much sentimental wise, object, but we want to create memories. So I believe, and I've had, you know, this sent to me, the messages of which come through are unbelievable. And I mean, you know, I did one for well, you had a guest on from Mount Longdon. I've just done a poppy for the sister of one of the guys killed on there. I did a poppy for one of the guys' son, who Corporal Ian Spencer, who was killed on Two Sisters, you know, with 4 or 5. There's loads as from guys corporals who died on my tour. I've actually got the from Sangin and those who were killed there. I've done poppies for their families, you know, of my colleagues. So I haven't got much of that earth left, but all the others, we're just building information and education. And I just think, yeah, I'm learning as well, because I don't really know much about the British Army. I was never in the army, you know. I regiments that, but yeah, you learn.
Rick, listen, I'm going to stop us there. Not that I know me and you can chat all day. I just don't want people going, oh bloody hell, that's 3 hours. That I ain't watching that, right?
No, I know, mate.
Because I want people. I think we've covered some really valuable stuff. We're talking on this podcast, mate. We talk about the stuff you just don't really
put this out live then, or is this being pre-recorded?
This is pre-recorded. I'll have to do some jiggery pokery. Now we've lost Andy. I'll have to
well, yeah, I mean, he was getting up and moving around and half bollocking us again. All right, sir. Yeah.
But and what I can also do for you, although we can discuss this in a minute, I can put this bit out as a separate video, so it's just talking about the conflict poppy, because hopefully
that makes sense.
Friends at home listening, if you can use Rick's services, if you just like to run a question by him, there's no Rick won't look at any question as being silly. He will welcome you all. I can tell you that, because he's a lovely man. I think we got a conflict coming on Saturday, mate, and we 50-year-old blokes trying to recreate the Royal Marines 9-miler.
I'll stick to my 40s, but yeah, we are. And you know, it's funny because like this one here, Craig, you know, Carry. Yeah, and you know, we've done that poppy for that, and that's sprinkled with the earth from Churchill's original commandos where they trained, you know, where they were formed and raised. And we're going to recreate this 9-mile speed march, which is one of the commando tests out of the 4 now. Instead of it being in Devon, we're going up to the spiritual home and original home of it, and we're going to go and do it as veterans. Some of us haven't done it for over, for myself, a quarter of a decade. and go and raise money, but raise awareness as well. And we're doing this. You have to challenge yourself when you're doing stuff. And
yes. And friends at home, if you can bung us a $5, we're not asking for a lot, but it'd be nice if you could give something. We're trying to raise awareness of veterans' mental health. We don't want any more, you know, families to lose the father or the mother. We're just trying to put a good message out, because once you crack this, you know.
Well, it's like this, isn't it? Because, you know, if I went into a pub and I seen an old boy, I would naturally buy out of that mutual and respect, buy him a pint. So instead of buying us a pint or a coffee, Chris will obviously put the link in. It would be more than appreciated, because we're helping to save a life, and for a virtual coffee for someone. And definitely, you can have our stories for free.
So, friends, if you want to get hold of either Rick or Andy, all the links will be below. As I said, at the very minimum, check out my Commando Coach playlist, because that's just a very simple philosophies on just changing your paradigm on life, because the universe doesn't really change. It stays the same, but it's how we think that we can have an effect over. So if the universe isn't perfect for you at the moment, and it should be, we just got to change our thinking a little bit. Anyway, enough said. Massive thank you to Andy Shaw. Andy, absolute legend. Rick, massive thank you to you. Please just stay on the line, Rick, and after I hit the record button off so I can thank you properly. To everyone at home, massive love to you all. Please look after yourself. Please let the past go. That's why it's called the past. Love yourself for who you are, because I love you. All my crew love you. And life can be such a beautiful place to be when we make those tweaks. If you can like and subscribe, that's really going to help the podcast and help us get this message out. I'm out of breath. See you.
Cheers. Thank you, Chris.